Thank you all very much.
Okay, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your attendance this evening. And we'll start with, oh, can I just make sure if you're not talking that you have your mute button on, please? First of all, agenda item 1, do you have any apologies for absence?
Sorry, Chairman, would you mind just reading the recording statement?
I haven't got it. Can you read it?
Yep, that's okay. Just for attendees who are listening in and committee members, this meeting will be recorded for future archive viewing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 1 was apologies for absence. Did we have any? No. Agenda item 2.
Just so you're aware, Chairman, Councillor Nugent-Finn is slightly delayed, but she is planning to join us.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of September. Would you like me to go through it page by page, or you're happy to move on block? Anybody?
Move the minutes.
Thank you, John. Thank
Move
you.
on block, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 for reference is the coronavirus recovery strategy. And Lance, can you talk us through this, please?
Sorry, Chairman, to interrupt, but can I just check there aren't any declarations of interest this evening, please?
Sorry, Amy.
Okay, I'll take that as declarations. Thank you.
Sorry, Lance. Agenda item 4, yours.
Thank you. What we have here is a reference from Cabinet, and I think colleagues will be or members will be aware from the last Scrutiny Committee meeting that we went in some depth really about the response that social services had made to the coronavirus, and essentially I suppose we covered probably the best part of 6 months detailed activity and frantic activity, I would probably say, in terms of how we would respond to how we had to respond to the virus. What we stopped short of last time really was describing the recovery arrangements in terms of actually what we were going to do going forward. And I think at the point that this report went to Cabinet is it was looking very much like you know, the prevalence of the virus was continuing to decrease. And we were hoping that we would still be in position where the virus was extremely low in terms of prevalence across the community. Obviously, things have deteriorated since that report was written, and I think, you know, one of the things that is included within the appendix to the Cabinet report really is a recognition that actually, should things deteriorate, that we would need to, I think the words used in here, ramp back as needed, recognizing that we may need to go back into those kind of more protective measures that we had put in place across the services. And I think probably the position that we find ourselves in social services, and I'm sure Dave would be able to comment in a little bit in terms of leisure as well, but from social services, is that our planned recovery has predominantly paused. It doesn't mean that we have stopped, but it's more to do with planning how we will recover now, rather than actually continuing to open up, if you like, services that had to close because of the prevalence. So I suppose just going back to the Cabinet report and the appendix, it's probably worth me just quickly whizzing through the appendix, and then we'll I'm happy to take any questions, although Dave might like to add a relevant point about whether, you know, what position within leisure services, and Rachel and Suzanne will hopefully step in just to kind of update in terms of their areas. So rather than repeat what we discussed last time, what I was going to suggest that we did really was look probably at the appendix, probably from I think it's page 29, where it starts to talk about transition and the kind of changes that we were looking at reintroducing and services that we were reintroducing. So I think, you know, it talks about in terms of obviously outside of this committee area, but the schools reopening and so on. So we'll all be familiar with that kind of reduction in restrictions and what that meant. And then I suppose we have formed as part of our recovery themes and strategy, we've made sure that that links back to a corporate service plan. So what we're doing within social care isn't sitting in isolation. And I think, you know, within this presentation, you see a reiteration of the corporate wellbeing objectives. And then we start to look into a bit more detail in terms of recovery themes. And I suppose for social care, if I'm honest, the majority of those themes sit within a section called supporting people at home in their community. There are other ones that you'll see about the environment, and also one that we probably particularly come into is probably working with and for our communities. So rather than repeat what's in this presentation, I thought it would just be helpful to build a bit on what we described last time in terms of social services, and I'll pick out the elements of the service for resource management and safeguarding department, and Rachel and Suzanne do children's and adults. But last time we talked very much about the establishment of a PPE team. So if I start with that, what we've been looking at the moment is actually we've developed a team plan for that PPE team. We're looking to establish that on a more permanent basis. I say more permanent, it's not entirely permanent, because we recognise that hopefully at some point we will be out of this. Welsh Government have written to us in the last few days to say that they will continue to provide us with PPE for the duration of the pandemic. The next one for us that I thought was be interesting for members is to let you know about DEWIS. So DEWIS is the information system that members of the public can access, and so we are continuing to update and develop that in light of COVID-19. Obviously that's going to contain some different messages within that. And I suppose the last one from a resource management and safeguarding perspective was just to mention the regional training unit, which a report on that. So social services have a regional training unit with Cardiff, and a report on that will be coming to Cabinet in due course. That was set up for 3 years initially. And what we found is that throughout COVID-19, we've been working very closely with our local providers, and we didn't want to lose that really positive arrangements that we've got working with them. And we felt that it would be beneficial to continue to work more closely. So I suppose those were the kind of key things I thought from resource management and safeguarding. I don't know whether, Chair, if I'm permitted to ask Rachel and Suzanne and Dave to step in to briefly just describe from their perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel?
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, there are actions obviously there for children as well in terms of recovery. I think it's probably helpful to summarise them in the context of what we're trying to do, which is really consolidating practice in the current and evolving context. So there's no question that practice for us, whether that's social work or other forms of practice across the division, is different, and we're trying hard to consolidate our practice in the current and evolving situation in a way that's responsive. So there are various examples of how we've done that, and that's our evolving family risk management plan, which wasn't only relevant at the start of the pandemic, but is helping us to inform activity with children and families. And our creative and extended use of what we're calling COVID assessed spaces to meet with children and families where home environments aren't always suitable for every visit. But that clearly doesn't mean that we're not in homes, because we are. And I think the other theme for us is applying learning. The pandemic has challenged us, continues to challenge us, but it's also afforded us opportunities to learn. And one of those is the way that virtual communication is becoming central at the moment in terms of how we communicate with children and families, and obviously with other partners, yourselves included. But I think we recognise that it can become a real and sustainable method of communicating with families alongside the face-to-face contact that we'll have. And just to give you a really real and practical example of where we've seen resumption, so recovery, one of the things that we needed to pause was introductions between children with a plan for adoption who'd been matched into adoptive placements. Those arrangements paused. And what we do now is we risk assess those introductions, recognising that delay simply isn't acceptable for children, that uncertainty. And those things have resumed. So there's examples across the service where we've paused and where we've resumed. So those what you might call individual recoveries for those individual children, but on a much larger scale, what that's really about is achieving outcomes for children, achieving in that context permanence for children, but also having a real focus on our activity, for example, in terms of how we safely and reduce our numbers of children looked after. That adoption is an exit from care, and for some children, that's a really positive outcome for them. So again, like Lance, trying to pick out some themes and share those with you.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Thank you, Chair. And certainly staying with that, it's similar in adult services, and again, not wanting to repeat what's been said before. We are looking at care and support at home and trying to balance the risks between the virus itself and also ensuring that we are in people's homes, assessing their situation and understanding where they are at the moment. It's only sustainable to not be in people's homes in the numbers that we were for a short period of time, because as we go into winter months, we know that it becomes more problematic, and where people are trying to sustain and be resilient, then we need to check that is still the case, and if not, be able to act. And so we are in a situation with care and support within people's own homes, is ensuring that we're trying to assess where appropriate, and picking up on Rachel's point around the use of digital means to ensure that we use that in assessments, in reviews, and in conversations with individuals and their families. And so what we're trying to do is trying to minimise the amount of time in a person's home by ensuring that we're doing assessments either over the phone or through digital means, and then being in the home for a minimum amount of time possible. And so things like that's a change in our practice, and trying to encourage that to happen across our workforce. And just to reassure as well that at the beginning of the pandemic, we needed to look at contingency plans in case our domiciliary care workforce was impacted. We were very fortunate that they weren't impacted in the numbers that we anticipated and we were planning for, but it's a continuous process, and so that is again part of recovery and renewal, to keep reviewing those contingency plans and ensure that they are fit for purpose, and ensure that we are assessing individuals and prioritising their needs accordingly, so to ensure that members are reassured that continues to happen. We were fortunate we didn't have to do those contingency plans earlier in the year, and so it's something that we need to flex according to where we are in relation to recovery and local lockdowns, etc., and dependent on what's happening with the workforce. The other area that I thought would be of interest to members was around day service provision. And so again, we know that there will be a cohort of individuals who will be keen to return to day services as was, and need to have that stimulation of a day opportunity, interaction with other people. and also the people that they may live with that care for them to have the ability to have some respite. And we are keen to look at that, but again, balancing the risks between managing our response to the virus and managing people's needs. And so we're at the stage where we're planning for a return to day services subject to approval, but we are looking at that in a very small number and ensuring that they're in COVID safe premises and practices, just to make sure that that happens. And that's the same for our internal provision across adult services, so learning disability, physical disabilities and older persons. And we're also looking at that with external providers as well, ensuring that risk assessments are robust and satisfactory before we seek to have anybody return to day services. So that's where we are in terms of recovery on that part. And the final part I just wanted to bring to members' attention was around our own staff and care management teams, keeping an eye on in terms of staff wellbeing and trying to ensure that they have access to premises, again safely, for on task-based functions, in order that they have the ability, that those that are struggling to work from home for a number of different reasons, that we try to ensure that we are managing their well-being and supporting them through this at the moment. And that is a significant part of our recovery in adult services, where we are compromised by some premises issues, in that currently the Vale Community Resource Service is in an alternative building to its normal home, and so we are working with partners to try to find a solution. I'm happy to take any questions or any comments.
Thank you, Suzanne. Does anybody have anything they would like to say to Lance, Suzanne or Rachel? Neil?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was going to ask Rachel, with the schools going back, there was some anecdotal evidence that the number of children reporting incidents over the summer as a result of lockdown and domestic violence issues had gone up, and I'm wondering whether that's now being evidenced within your section, and what sort of pressures that's now putting on you, please, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. We actually undertook a demand review in August, looking at some of our key areas, one of which is the front door, another is child protection register, CLA numbers, etc. And we, at that point, we were anticipating, as you described, a heightened position when schools returned, to the point that we weren't content to conclude our review in August, and we're actually meeting towards the end of this month to properly collate that information. On a weekly basis, I can tell you that those numbers remain high in terms of contacts into the department, and the more detailed analysis that we'll do at the end of October will give us a greater indication. But there's no question that schools returning has had an impact. We've also maintained the Vulnerable Children Tactical Group, which is a cross-directorate group, so that we can consider, keep an eye on children's well-being in terms of their return, being sure that we had services to respond to them, so that schools are supported in signposting, etc. And also in relation to planning a play provision for October half term in the same way that we did for the summer, recognising that pressures in families are continuing, and that provision is currently being referred to, and is very much in partnership with colleagues in Dave's team, and we're grateful for that continuing relationship and cooperation to support our vulnerable families, which is obviously broader than children looked after, but certainly those known to us in terms of care and support.
Thank you, Rachel. Has anybody else got any questions they'd like to ask, or any? I'm just pleased that you found some positives out of this terrible pandemic, and you are learning things that you can now use when this is all over as well. I was concerned that the adoption had to be put on hold for a while, and I'm really pleased that is now moving ahead. And the day services are being looked into, because this is, well, as you know, is such an important thing in so many people's lives. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. Dave, would you like to brief us on anything new to do with leisure services?
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a mixed picture as far as my services are concerned. Obviously, leisure centres are now fully open. I wouldn't say fully operational. It is a greatly reduced service with the restrictions we've got in place. And understandably, a large number of our customers have chosen not to return at the current times. And financially, that is putting pressure on the services, and there will be a report to Cabinet detailing that very, very shortly. We've not been allowed to recommence our National Exercise Referral Scheme. Public Health Wales have given us instructions that we're not allowed to do it in person at the moment. So that's still a virtual scheme, and we are contacting clients by telephone and just advising them in terms of what's going on. We have now been allowed to repurpose staff that are involved in NERS by Public Health Wales, which we haven't been able to do to date. So there are opportunities there if it is COVID related. And again, I'm keen to speak to colleagues to what opportunities may exist for those members of staff. In reverse of that, in sports development, we've now likely to be informed by Sports Council this week. We've been verbally informed, but we're still waiting for confirmation in writing that where we have been able to repurpose staff that they financially support, that's likely to end, and they now want us to be planning for the resumption of sports development activities, which is difficult in the current climate. They are announcing new initiatives to help us with sports clubs and to help particularly with the over 60s. And we're very keen to see how that sort of works with the restrictions that we've got in terms of the NERS scheme at the moment. So that could be particularly challenging. Rachel's already touched on play, and obviously play services are continuing where it's applicable to do so and where that support is required. And I think that's been most welcomed by our communities. And again, I'm very grateful for the very positive comments that Rachel's already given. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody got any questions for Dave? No? Well, I'm sure I can speak. Oh, Neil?
Yes, sorry, Chair, but Dave, I'm aware that the leisure centre in Penarth, the swimming there, is fully booked. All the few sessions that they have, I think they have quite a limited number of sessions, and they're each limited to 45 minutes. Is there capacity? Is there scope, do you think, for looking at possibly more sessions? Because certainly, as I say, the ones that are there now are being fully booked, and I'm aware that people are finding it difficult to find gaps. I mean, people are getting on very quickly, and people just can't get booked in because there's no scope.
I think we very much understand those frustrations that people have got at the moment with the restrictions that we have got in place. We are working very closely with Legacy in terms of what opportunities are out there and expanding those opportunities, but being very mindful of the restrictions that we have to operate in. You know, I think it's very important to point out that some of our competitors have had improvement notices, and one of our competitors has actually been given a closure notice. We're very conscious that we represent the Vale of Glamorgan Council, and we've got to provide services that meet with the restrictions that are currently in place. So if people are frustrated, I do apologise, but it's very, very important that our services are of the highest quality. And we have been re-emphasising that to Legacy in terms of them introducing services. And a good example of that is in swimming, is where we've had to reduce the capacities in terms of swimming lessons to meet with the restrictions that have been placed upon us. So I do apologise, Neil, if people haven't been able to access as much swimming as they would like, and hopefully the situation will improve over the coming months.
Okay, Neil? Okay. Well, that takes us on to agenda item 5. But first of all, can you pass on to the staff? I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the committee. Thank them very much for all the work that they are doing under such a difficult situation at the moment. And agenda item 5 is any items which the chairman has decided they're urgent. I have none. And there are no part 2 items. So thank you all very much for your attendance.
Chair, before we finish, can I just raise one thing for forward planning? If you remember last year, about this time last year, I was I brought to the attention of the Scrutiny Committee the triage system that was being introduced in Penarth in GP surgery in Penarth. That was the plan was to roll that out across the county over the coming period. Of course, that's been on hold now due to unforeseen circumstances at the time. However, I understand that Tom Bowring now has a presentation on the triage, on the GP triage set up and what the plan is. And I think that it would be helpful if that was brought to this committee at a fairly soon date for us to hear what the provisions are, what the proposals are. Personally, I think the actual triage ideas are excellent. There are concerns in terms of the way it's operating in certain, or it's potentially operating in certain surgeries who perhaps aren't taking it in the same way as others might. But the system will be introduced, I believe. So I think this committee needs to know about it. And as I say, I'd like to see it come as soon as possible.
I'm sure that can be arranged. Thank you for bringing it back to our attention, Neil. Anybody else got anything they'd like to say on that? No? Then, yeah, Lance?
I'm not sure of the report that you're referring to of Tom's, and maybe Suzanne is aware of it. I suppose from a social services point of view, the GP triage services, obviously it's a health service, and I'm aware that we were obviously supportive of that bid and transformation fund because it was going to help a known problem that our Vale residents were experiencing. I suppose to me it's not a social services report, I suppose, because it's not our core business. But I feel like I'm speaking from a position of ignorance because I haven't seen a report from Tom. So I may well know a lot more than I do.
Suzanne does know about it. She was at the meeting where this came up a couple of days ago.
Okay, and so just for clarity, it's a report that's by Tom Narborough, not by Tom Bowring. So Tom Narborough is the project manager.
I apologise.
For GP triage, and what I would urge members is that it's a pilot project that is currently funded through till March 2021. We have heard that there may be some additional funds for transformation going forward, but we don't know what that might look like at this point. We are waiting for further advice from Welsh Government, and then potentially to go through, well, it will need to go through the Regional Partnership Board. And so the report that Councillor Thomas is referring to is that I had said that, given that I'm in an integrated role, that there is a report that is reflecting on what progress has happened with the pilot to date, and the intention to continue that would be where we would want to go. But as Lance wants to come in.
Lance.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the report that has just struck me, the report that social services routinely bring it, and I think it would be due in January, but I will have to check, would be the report regarding the regional partnership arrangements. And that is previously, I suppose, where that GP triage element would be considered. Assuming it is January, I think that would seem a sensible way to bring that in if that was agreeable to everybody. But I would need to check, unless Amy knows off the top of her head when that report is due.
Yeah, well, we should have gathered up more information then, Suzanne, shouldn't we? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Bearing in mind that this is going to be introduced, as Suzanne's just said, March 20, this coming March 21. The proposal is for that. I think that's what you just said, wasn't it?
So at the moment, what I'm saying is that currently the project is only funded through till March 2021. It's subject to approval going forward of both funds and the project itself. And so it would be appropriate to bring that as part of a wider report that Lance is certainly advising around the Regional Partnership Board. That would be the annual kind of report, and by January we would know what the outcome of the funding situation is and what the plan going forward would be. And just to reassure members, that means that in your current roles, I'm happy to have those conversations with you, but it just feels that that would be a better way from a scrutiny committee. That would be a recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Just to confirm, committee, the report is expected in January.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of common sense then to leave it till we've got all the information that we need. So back on to agenda item 6. I have no chairman's urgent items. So once more, thank you all very much for your attendance. Have a good evening and see you all next time. Keep safe.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Take care.
Good night, all.
Why won't you close?